Thank you. Please move up. It's a small. I must say, this session in the Dubai FHS Summits, this is a very mature market. This goes over very well in the Africa Summit where you're educating people. But a little about myself. I'm an international hotels franchise and today particularly branded residential lawyer. I started out actually as an international tax consultant when very few people did it. I've spent 23 years in Russia, Moscow, St. Petersburg, a year in Kiev. And I came here in 2015 with an international firm and then went off on my own in 2020, focusing entirely in the hospitality sector. Today, I'm going to raise a few points, but please, I want to make this interactive, a debate if we can. If you want to take it off-piste a different way, let me know. But I guess one of the things, the topic is mastering contract structures for maximizing returns. It really depends. You've got to look your project in the mirror. Who are you if you're a developer? Are you big? Is it your first hotel? Is it a sole asset? And then where is your property? Is it a primary location or a secondary location? Because that makes a big difference in who you select as a brand and how you're going to be treated. I generally work with developers, so I'm a bit biased to the brand side. But the reality is these big guys, if you're one of these smaller operators, it may make sense, we're talking about structure, either to go with a smaller brand who you're more important to and who will pay more attention, or consider the franchise model with a white label independent operator. The difference with the independent operators is they work for you, not for the brand. The brand works for the brand and then for you. They're more nimble. They generally are focused. You are their client. They're going to focus more on the numbers and being more attentive to you. And you're probably going to get a better result. There's been numerous studies done, I think HVS and others, that have compared brand-operated hotels and independent operator hotels. And generally, the independents perform better. Because again, they're focused more on delivering to you and delivering on the numbers. I worked in Russia. I worked with Interstate when they came in the early 90s. And this was the Wild West. And a lot of the big brands didn't want to come there. They were worried about security as well as compliance reasons, corruption. Interstate, this was the first time out of the United States. They focused, developed, and they were generating GOPs of 60, 70% because they had a real core team. They focused on the owner's attention. The owners one owner gave them complete control of the property, and they were able to manage those hotels so much better than the brands could. It was phenomenal. And they had a real core team, and they got to know the market. This is another point on that. There's an adage that franchise doesn't work in emerging markets. They're not so sophisticated. I don't think that's true at all anymore, particularly with the growth of the third-party operators. My experience in Russia and how well they did there, you see today in Africa. The brands, for various reasons, they don't have the capacity. Franchise is a much faster way to growth, and they don't have the country experience and regional experience. And probably there's a compliance issue as well for them. They're happy to grant an independent operator to run their brand under a franchise and get a better result. That said, when you're starting off with any project, and I'm not pitching my thing, get good consultants. There's an adage, apparently Iran is the rhinoplasty capital of the world. That's nose jobs. And there's a saying that do your research and get a good surgeon, because you can't you can't make it the same the second time round. That same goes with the hotel. Get good consultants who will structure it, the right mix of rooms, the right mix of F&B, and the like. Same goes for tax, same goes for legal. That investment up front is very important. Next is, I would say, I frequently get involved in projects after the LOI is signed. And I say, why? And they say, well, the LOI is not binding, which is true. But think of an LOI, think of it like you're a young, pretty single girl, and you've got plenty of suitors buying you flowers, taking you to dinner. When you sign the LOI, it's like getting engaged. It's not legally binding, but it's hard to back out. Your mother's gone and told her friends, she's booked a wedding hall, and suddenly those gifts and presents start drying up. So stay single as long as you can. Get some involvement in an LOI. I typically will tell somebody, look, spend a couple hours on an LOI for free, because it will save so much time later. And you can secure conditions at the LOI stage far better than after you've signed it. And then you try to raise something and they say, oh, you're back trading, whatever. So do that. Try to get some involvement and get as many of the terms in the LOI as possible. In negotiations, I have a list, I think it's like 25 different languages of an international concept. In Russia, it's vremya dengi. Le temps c'est argent in French. In Swahili, it's muda ne pasa. It's time is money. It's true. Time kills deals. Get your people in place, get your decision makers in place, and get it done. You don't want to send delegates and then, after all the negotiation has happened, you come back and the senior people look at it and say, no, we don't want this. That's embarrassing, it's a waste of time, and it's a waste of time for the brand as well. Get good people, decisions makers at the table, and get it done. Another thing today is, and I'm dealing with this now with some renegotiations with the brands. Historically, the brands have not done terribly well with food and beverage. And you see this in Dubai, which this is probably the capital of creativity and intense competition in F&B. If you're considering getting outside, hiring a brand, let's just, for example, let's say a Nobu or something, and you're going to do that either under a management agreement, or typically it will be done under a license agreement so that the hotel is running it, but according to the brand standards, under the name and license. You're paying an extra amount for the F&B because of the brand's failure to be able to do F&B. So discussing that with them, there should be some offset on the management fee. I know they don't like to hear this, but you're not using the brand and paying them their base and incentive fee for that. You're having to go outside and use someone else's brand, so there should be an offset to that. Something else here in Dubai, the branded residence capital of the world. I do significant amount of branded residential today, both standalone, without a hotel, and with mixed use. Frequently you see with the mixed use that the branded residential is an afterthought. We're thinking about it. I go back to my rhinoplasty example. You need to think about the branded residences when you're doing and developing the hotel. It will save you money because you can do the technical services and the fee together, but very often the branded residential component will really impact the hotel. If you had a rental pool where you were putting the residents into the hotel inventory, if you don't account for that right, the hotel will not have the back of house facilities to be able to service those units. If you're going to have, you need to have the right appropriate mix. If there's going to be branded residential where people are no rental pool, but they are people who want to live there and commute, or live there and have a community, they're going to be quite upset if you bring in a rental pool and suddenly I open the door and next door to me, who's this? I don't know my neighbor. I don't know the people around the pool. You need to really, branded residential, if it's structured right, it can be very efficient for the assets and the use of the assets and even shared facilities, and it's a very good enhancer to the hotel's P&L. But if you don't think about that and how it's going to be structured, rental pool, no rental pool, how that rental pool is structured, getting legal advice, which I frequently see is not done, about what are the local laws regarding mixed-use ownership. Is there an owners association? Is there no mixed-use rules? Or like Dubai, you have the third-party building manager structure. All of that will impact the documentation, and if you don't do it right, you're going to spend a lot of money and time extra. Any questions so far? Or yes.
I'm mainly on the branded operator side. So
Oh.
I act mainly on the branded operator side. The issue we sometimes have is over the course of negotiating or the course of development, the local rules for mixed-use developments or for residential, especially in emerging markets, change quite frequently. Do you have advice for sort of owners and developers on, when you're considering that sort of local law element, whether it's Dubai or whether it's one of the African markets, as to if you look at that sort of more holistically? Because, oftentimes we found that, we advise the brands and they say, well, these local laws might be different in 6 years' time when this actually kicks in and the resi part's there. Is that something that you come up against for owners and developers quite a lot as well?
Yes, I had the mistake of doing that about 2 years ago. This was in Ras Al Khaimah, and there was discussion that they were going to adopt the Dubai law. And so we decided, okay, by the time this is ready, it will be kicking in. So we put the documents, and they didn't. They did recently, but it was too early, and we had to go back to the old owners association. I mean, you factor in some elements, recognizing that the laws will change. I know in Dubai, the operators want to keep, and the legislation contemplates that the developer will stay in the game through retention of a retail space. Well, that's not what developers do. They develop, they sell, and they leave. But the operators, rightfully so, want someone who's responsible to stick around, certainly through the construction defects and later on, because they're simply attaching their brand. They're not running it, and they want someone either to retain that control, someone to contractually be linked with. But you do need to factor that in. You may have some clauses that we will reconsider in the event the laws change. But it is a factor, and especially in emerging markets, you're frequently dealing with nothing. I've been doing some projects in Georgia, which, that is just a time bomb ready to blow. Down in Batumi, they have, they're not branded residences, they're co-op hotels, where middle to lower middle class people are putting in $100,000, $200,000 of their life savings to buy a unit in a hotel. There's no escrow laws. There's no controls on what the owner does. That you go and, Bruno, I sent it to Daniel. I'm traveling down there, I see this picture, big advertising, invest in Accor. I drive a little further on. You can be part of Marriott, and you're just attaching your brand license. You're not running it, but all of this documentation is pitching it as if the brands are a participant or an investor in the project. So you do have to be careful. And frequently you'll see with the operators, and I do have sympathy for them, where there are no laws, say an escrow limit, which, that was the problem in Dubai back in 2007. A lot of people got burned. Now we have very rigid escrow laws. Where there's not, the major operators will say, look, It may not be in the legislation, but you not need the self-discipline to establish an escrow, because when it goes wrong, they don't blame, oh, I got cheated on a dodgy development. They'll say, I got cheated on an Accor property or a Marriott property. So there is some self-control there. And ultimately, some of these rules are for the benefit of everybody, because if you're a developer, you want to get that first project right, get some happy owners, and move on to a second one. But they can go wrong very quickly. Yeah. In the branded residential particularly, the number of players getting into it, you've probably seen here in Dubai that are non-hotel brands. Last year I was driving down Sheikh Zayed Road, and Fashion TV branded residences. Well, if I buy a Fairmont residence, I kind of know the brand promise. Fairmont has been in the residential hospitality services for years. They have brand standards that they've adapted from their hotels. Fashion TV, what is the brand promise? Do I get a lingerie show through the lobby every day? Maybe attractive for single men, probably not their spouse. Do they have brand standards? Maybe not. I was in negotiations with one of these non-brands. We were talking about that, and they said, oh, we don't have any brand standards yet. We're going to hire somebody to do it. There's no history in the residential hospitality service living experience. And it will be interesting to see in several years after the sale. There was a Chelsea Football Club residences. What those standards will be several years on. I'm skeptical. We know with the big brands, this is what they do, and they have the reputation of the brand. Where these non-hotel brands have done this, they're just going as a sideline. It's a different area to exploit their brand. But are they committed to the hospitality and leisure segment? We shall see. So I mentioned get as much as you can in the LOI. Another thing important is to identify the structure. That is for you as a developer. Are you going to develop, and that entity is going to be the entity that opens and operates the hotel under its P&L? Or more common and often tax-driven, will you have a development company, a property company, and then you will establish an operating company which will lease the hotel from the property company, and that entity will engage with the brand operator and operate the hotel. That's important. Typically, the big brands don't care, but if you have the OpCo-PropCo structure, they're going to want some sort of guarantee that the property company guarantees that the lease will stay in place for the length of the management contract, or if not, they will step in and allow the management to continue. Likewise, for the operators, and I think we'll see this more now in the UAE because of the advent of tax. Before you had, a number of the bigger operators, because of their presence here, you're contracting with a local entity. So there's no issue on tax, you're contracting UAE entity to UAE entity. But some of the smaller brands who've been contracting from their home office in Switzerland or the Netherlands, that may no longer work, because as the tax authorities become more sophisticated, they're going to say, look, it's a management contract. You're doing business in the UAE. You should tax register and pay tax and your fees. And I've so many times, tax is not an issue. What's the adage? The certainties in life are death and taxes. You will start seeing more questions on this, and we typically put in a clause that in the event of any adverse tax impact to either party, the parties will sit down and negotiate an alternative structure that is equitable to both parties. Tax isn't such a bad thing, because before, another example, in Russia, it used to be to pay someone $1,000, this was in the early 90s, it would cost the hotel $2,400. So everyone's payroll was off the books. And the tax rates were about, with the social charges, well over 50%. They reduced the rate down to 13%. Overnight, the tax revenues, income tax revenues, quadrupled by dropping the rate. And suddenly, you could value the companies because their payroll was on the books, and you could value the companies. Likewise, I think with corporate tax here and the requirement for annual audits, that the valuation of hotel properties will be much more accurate than they've historically been. And I think you'll have more of a secondary market now that foreign, not 51% UAE entities alone can purchase. So I think there is an upside to the tax, that it does create better books. Technical services. I think in many cases that's probably the most valuable thing the operators do. That you want them to be active. You want their input. You don't want them just to give you the brand standards. You go off and do it. They come back and say, tick, 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 yes, you've done it. You want them to be active. They have learned from experience, success and failure, what works. You really want that involvement. The key things on the technical services, I go back to time is money. You want both parties to be very quick. They give you the services, you respond, you prepare your designs and drawings, you send them back, and we have quick approval times. And if they don't do the approval times in, say, 15 days, you send them a note saying, second notice, if you don't do it within 7 days, it's deemed approved. You want to keep that one. Also, you want in the technical services, once they give them to you, there can be no changes, so that you don't have to go retool the project, apart from things that might be mandatory, such as applicable laws, fire life safety standards, possibly IT standards, because they're so quickly changing. Likewise, you should have, brand standards are nice, but they're very expensive. A freeze in the contract. So from the opening date, anything we've structured that is brand standards, should you change them, we have a freeze period of 3 years, 5 years, both from the opening date, but on any major technical refurbishments. So after year 5, we reinstall all the televisions for flat screen televisions, and suddenly 2 months later, the brand comes out and says, we want curved flat screen television. Well, that's fine, but we will replace those when they're amortized or over or a 3-year period, whatever it's like. Again, you want their input, and another thing we will frequently try to do is seek with the technical service. If we complete the hotel on time and to the standard, you will rebate part of that technical services fee, because that technical services fee is for the benefit of you in getting the hotel built to the brand, but it's also for the benefit of the brand, that it's to their standard and it's a hotel that will enhance their brand as well as perform much better. More question? Anything? Anything? If you want to disagree with me, please. Yes.
Scott.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, hey Scott. So as you know, we on the TSA front, Redis team is actually on every single meeting with us. I was thinking, would it be possible to actually directly put it in the contract as well for them to actually attend on the meetings? I don't think that's usually required by the contract, but it has been amazing for us. Every single decision has been made just like that on the meeting directly. Oh, thanks.
Why not?
Yeah,
I mean,
next time I'm signing something, I'm
you may
thinking
have to pay for it, but the value of their input
Yeah, it was
at
amazing.
that stage is probably more valuable than when they're managing the hotel, because in managing the hotel, all the employees are yours. They find a general manager, they find a finance director, they give them to you, you approve them. All the employees, including them, are yours. So they're it's a bit in these management contracts. It's a bit like management by drone, because the GM, who's your employee, the finance director, who's your employee, is taking directions, and the brand is supervising, directing, and controlling these individuals in their operation of the hotel. So the reality, despite what it says, you're really running the hotel. So I think getting their involvement, getting it right, is worth the expense. And here it's not like they're flying from London every day.
Exactly.
They've got a local tech services team. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like you're very happy with that.
Yeah, I was going to say, for everyone's benefit, having a representative from Radisson on almost pretty much every single design meeting every week means that whenever we submitted anything for Radisson, actually pretty much everything was approved, because they already all knew, they were in the process from the start, so they knew what they were getting, and then, there were barely any comments every time. But I'm just saying, next time we're negotiating HMA, I'm definitely putting that directly into the city. They have to be at least, like, let's say, two meetings per month or whatever they need to attend. Yeah, it helped tremendously. We had literally 0 slowdowns the whole year. Like, we're pretty much on schedule after a year. We're now finishing development. We're just beginning construction. We're doing the Radisson Red on Marjan Island in Ras Al Khaimah.
And you can put in minimum number of visits, but I think that's that's money well spent.
Yeah.
And it pays for
Thanks.
themselves.
Yeah.
Let's go to terms. Now, typically, certainly the publicly listed companies, it's rare that they will go, unless you've got the right site, below 20 years. And it's so annoying, because they say, look, we're publicly listed, our share price is based on the present value of our future earnings. That has nothing to do with your cost and development of a hotel. But you hear this time and again. With the third-party operators, where they're running it and you're under a franchise, you can get much lower. You can get 5, that's probably low, 10 to 15 years. And then with the franchise, similar. So there is a little more, going back to the franchise, a little more flexibility there. And the other thing is, yes, you've got a much more hands-on operator with a third-party brand, that you're not stuck quite as long. Touching back on franchise, I've been dealing with a franchise agreement with really, you're not paying them to run the hotel. Basically, you're paying them for the brand and the distribution system. That's what you're paying for. Well, what if the distribution system doesn't deliver? I was working with an owner, and this was in Sharjah, and a well-known mid-scale brand. The distribution system was delivering 1%. And we met with them and said, well, what are you doing here? You're not adding any value. It's all coming through Booking.com, Expedia, and to put in some sort of, it's like a performance test for franchise agreements, that a minimum distribution through the brand system. Now, there are potentially ways that the owner can rig that to potentially kick someone out, and you're not going to get anything like 50% or anything like that, but some sort of minimum threshold for the delivery of the brand through its system is something that one should seek. On fees, it can vary, but the historic many years ago was a base fee of 3 and a incentive of 10 based on GOP. Those days are kind of gone. You can get a much lower base fee, and often get the base fee starting low, maybe at 1%, and tier up over several years during your stabilization period to 175, 2. And then much preferred to have a tiered incentive fee based on GOP. So Anything, for example, any GOP below 20%, the incentive fee would be 0. 25%, it might be 6, and go up and up and up. And if the operator's delivering 50% GOP, basically on every extra dollar they bring in, you're getting 90 cents on that. So I wouldn't be too bothered about paying them a premium if they can reach that level. Luxury properties tend to have lower base and incentive fees, but the costs are higher with them. Central services. These are the systems charges, the global marketing. These are the black hole of these agreements. And I've sat with senior vice presidents of the big brands, and you ask them, quantify this. They can't. Some of them are on a percentage of revenue, some of them on an amount per month, some of them are all on different things. They can't really quantify what they will be. So what we frequently try to do here is, look, they say we're paying, everyone in the system pays the same, although I said that can occasionally be negotiated if you have significant clout with that operator or you have a prime location they want to be in. But let's cap these central services fees at a certain amount based on revenue, a certain numerical amount, and above that we don't pay. So at least we can budget appropriately for them. But they really are, if you read through them, they're very confusing and very unquantifiable. Owners' priorities you frequently will see in the early years of the hotel to, if the hotel does not generate a certain return, typically sufficient to cover any bank debt, that the operator will defer their incentive fees to a certain period. And that's often in the ramp-up period, the first 5 years or so. But again, I frequently see developer clients raising this point at the negotiations, and that's way too late. Because if you do have an owner's priority, the operator is probably going to want a slightly more rich fee. So that's something you need to discuss at the LOI stage, again, when, as I mentioned, when you're a young single girl with plenty of suitors. I touched on taxes. You don't want to overlook taxes. And fortunately, the UAE has a reasonable tax treaty network. And today, the UAE doesn't impose withholding tax. But they will very soon. It's easy to impose withholding tax because that's a tax on foreigners. It's good domestic politically. I would say the standard, many of the operators will want to gross up all the fees, and you'll see that when they come. Everyone should be a good citizen and pay their taxes. I believe the market standard is the operator should pay any income, profits, or withholding taxes on their profit-bearing fees, their base and their incentive fees. On the other fees, the systems charges, the central services, which are generally viewed as reimbursable costs, you will need a gross up because you can't reimburse somebody after tax. They're not fully reimbursed. That's the starting point. But you will see frequently in the operator's starting position, oh, no, gross up on everything. As I said, everyone needs to be a good citizen, pay their tax. And besides, they get a foreign tax credit in their home country, so they are offsetting it. Not perfectly, but very typically they are. You need to include, again, so many of this has been neglected because of the lack of taxation here, provisions in the contract that because this is the operator's tax, they will obtain any tax residency certificates or other documentation necessary to avail of any double tax treaty. It's their tax. You can't do it. They have to do it. You need to put that in the contract. Owner approvals. I mean, it's gotten better, and some operators are better than others, but certainly an owner should have approval over key personnel. The general manager, the finance director, director of sales, certain property, you might even want to go in into the head chef. In regional markets, an owner should be able to recommend their own qualified personnel. They have to be qualified, but if you're in Africa, the brands are recommending people from their pool of presently unengaged general managers from their pool, not because they necessarily fit your property. And I've seen some really bad placements of people who didn't want to be there and weren't appropriate for the location. Say you're in a challenging part of Africa. There's a very good chance that, and you're running opening an Accor hotel. There's a very good chance that up the road, there's a very good general manager of a local hotel or a Radisson hotel or whatever, who's invested in the community, maybe married, living in the community, likes to live there, much better opportunity. So that having the opportunity to recommend, again, qualified people is something you should do. Approval rights, certainly the annual budget, FF&E expenditure, capital budget repairs over non-budgeted items with a certain number. It might be 50,000, it might be 100,000 or more above a certain lease contracts over a year and not terminable at a short time. I have, Bruner and I were working with an owner who is very vertically integrated. They have multiple hotels. They have their own construction team. They have their own procurement team. They have their own car rental, everything. And it's very important for that owner to have in the contract that we are able to recommend our affiliated vendors. They have to, of course, go through the vendor procedures, price, quality, reliability, but they need to be put forward. That can be very important, and especially in markets that are new to an operator. It's very likely that you, as a local person, are going to know better construction people, often security people. Maybe you've got in your other properties, whatever, you've got security systems. You want to keep those harmonized. So you want to have some say there. I was put in I started off saying that the big brands are focused on the brand and net unit growth. And if you're out in remote regions, it can be fairly lonely out there. We always put in a clause that an owner escalation clause. It's not an interference clause where the owner can interfere with the day-to-day operation. But in the event the owner has substantiated concerns that your general manager, the finance director, is doing something inappropriate. That could be fraud, it could be sexual harassment, whatever. They will address that to the regional office of the operator. They will expedite it, investigate it, and take appropriate action, which may be, look, we looked at it, it looks like, at face it looks like fraud, actually it's proper procedures, so don't worry. Or yes, we found something, we will make progress. This is something you should do. Any questions? Yes?
On that last point that you mentioned, there are instances where, let's say, you're right as an owner regarding, let's say, certain actions by employees. You can take certain actions, whereas the operator might have more lenient policies, and they wouldn't take these actions against, let's say,
the negligence of an employee for any reason, because this is how the operator does it. Typically, does that prevent
Give me
you
an example.
An example would be, let's say, a front desk employee doesn't follow proper process. He doesn't, let's say, take a credit card upon check-in, and then the guest checks out without paying. That's total negligence on the part of the employee. although he's terminated, could be terminated by law, you could actually, again, by law, claim some of his end of service through the legal channels. But some operators would tell you, no, our policy is that we do not, let's say, go after an employee regardless of negligence. Now, technically, the employee is your employee.
He's
but
your employee, exactly.
do the operator standards or policies prohibit you as an employee usually from proceeding legally, or because this is similar to what you're mentioning, that when you see something wrong, you want to interfere as an owner, even if it's within the operator's policy.
Yeah, and that should be within the operator's realm, and their policies and procedures should address that. It probably does, but they choose not to pursue that. I faced this a number of times in Russia, that where you caught an employee stealing, the effort you had to go to pursue it, and the exposure of other employees and having to testify, everyone just backed off because it was so difficult. And so, yeah, the brands would say, look, it's just not worth it. And it's negative to the other employees' morale, not because they approved of it, it's just because they were intimidated. Now that was a pretty wild east place, but that's a difficult one. But yeah,
And
but you're right.
would you
Your
see
employee.
owners interfering when operators don't? In the cases that you mentioned.
And they could. I mean, as you say, he's your employee. But I think that would be a case-by-case situation. But I can see the point. But I also, what impact does that have on the other employees? Do they have to testify against their former colleague as their potential repercussions from that? And it's exposing the fraud to the entire hotel staff, whereas you may be able to keep it quiet, and that's probably better for the personnel. So, yes.
Sorry. Hi. So I'm going to jump back a little bit to the fees, and I wanted to ask: we are developing a mixed-use building where we'll have in one long-term, short-term stays. And would you actually consider to have two different fee structures for the short term and for the long term? So because, for example, I don't know, the marketing fee.
This is a hotel, or these are service departments? Or?
It's a hotel with a co-living. So
A colony.
Co-living.
Oh, co-living.
Co-living.
Okay.
So, and I think the marketing for the co-living part is totally different, or you approach the co-living part with a different structure. So would you consider to put in the LOI, for example, two different fee structures?
Well, it's more cost effective for extended stay than short-term stay. Short-term guests tend to use more facilities. They're a little more demanding on the hotel staff, whatever, versus long-term stays. Once you're living there, you don't use the amenities quite as often. So, and it's cheaper to run, and very often the extended stay, you're not doing day-to-day housekeeping as you would in the short term. So there might be an adjustment in the fee. I mean, there's no reason. I've seen where we have two separate agreements for both, where they mirror. I've seen where we have a slight adjustment in the fees, and I've seen them all in one agreement and run them the same. And I mean, it makes sense to use the same staff for both, but you'd want a separate P&L. And I could see, I think you'd have an argument that the longer living, the margins on that, the costs of sales, the costs of servicing them is much lower, and the margin should be higher.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Hello? Can you get right here?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, when you're representing an owner who, he just signed a management contract with, let's say, Citizen M, and after signing that contract, Citizen M gets acquired by Marriott. How do you then go about renegotiating those fees? Because I imagine that they're pretty different, and they could potentially be higher, where you have higher S&M fees or reservation fees.
That's a good point. And, you probably went to Citizen M because it was quirky, lifestyle, accessible. The people in management knew you, and then they get acquired by this monster, and it becomes less personal. That's not what you signed. I mean, that's in a legal term. That's a material change of circumstances. That I would argue that you would have, either a renegotiation or even potential exit. Now, that would be difficult to challenge. I know with some of the mergers, U.S. mergers some years ago, some owners did make a challenge like this and were able to exit. I suspect it was less of a legal claim than it was a bit of an embarrassment and a hassle for the brand, and they just said, okay, go, because you're little. But that is a major concern. I mean, let's say you sign up with a group that is all economy hotels, very, very good, big box with lots of small boxes inside that make a lot of money. Suddenly they acquire luxury, and their focus goes to luxury only. You funded all these costs, including central services, marketing fees, that they're now applying to develop luxury hotels. What does that have to do with my hotel and why I signed up with you? It's a very good point, but I would think you would still have, for the term of the contract, those fees, even the central service fees, at that level, because you've got a contract with them. Although they do usually they are subject to change. So. Territorials. A non-compete around your hotel. Interesting, in Dubai, I've worked with one client. Every time we do a territorial, 2/3 of the territorial's out in the sea. And you look, whoa, what? But here, that's relevant. Likewise, when you do a territorial, you don't want to say, the operator will not open another hotel in the city of Sharjah. Well, cities change. I was doing a project, actually it was with Accor, and we had in Moscow, and we had the city of Moscow for a luxury hotel. While we were negotiating, the city of Moscow expanded, doubled in size. And so you need, with territorials, A, contemplate landfill, and B, use GPS points, because roads change, things change, particularly in Dubai. I think how much time do we have left?
Scott, if I may just jump in on the restricted area point.
Yeah.
I just wondered what your views are on your tolerance on the chain acquisition point that a number of the big brands try and bring in, whereby were there to be a chain acquisition of, let's say, 4 or 5 hotels, and one of those hotels were in your restricted area, they would have the ability to rebrand to the restricted concept.
Yeah, that's a get-out clause, isn't it? I mean, I fought with those successfully, unsuccessfully. I mean, they're arguing that yes, this is part of. It would inhibit our global acquisition, but I don't really buy that.
With the number of concepts they have under their portfolios,
yeah,
the bigger ones.
I mean, in some of the bigger brands, these guys today, I mean, they're 50 shades of beige. I mean, there's not a lot of difference in some of these brands. And then, you can do Radisson Red, Radisson Blue, Radisson Green, and get around it. I've never had that triggered.
Likewise.
But and I think they have to actually acquire them, and the big brands are asset light, so it's unlikely they would acquire those. But it is a get out clause, and you've seen more and more of the operators try to stick that in.
Together
From
with
the
other
original one,
conditions
yes.
that would disapply.
Yeah. What do we have? 5 minutes? So please ask some questions. I don't want to just go on.
The one, if
Yes.
I can then, to bring us back to the performance test. I mean, obviously with the greater emergence of franchise arrangements in the Middle East, you discussed the challenges of trying to put in place an appropriate performance test under a franchise arrangement. And obviously we've had those sort of discussions as well, comparing the distribution network, the value that brings in versus the OTAs. And often the response we receive from the brands is that even the success on the OTAs is a result of their brand position and the work that they do on that. And then I've heard another argument run in terms of pricing strategy as well. Obviously retaining higher rates at asset level, brand level, which are not designed to necessarily compete with OTA and comparator websites. So it's a challenging one, I feel. I wonder if you've kind of come up with a workable solution.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago we didn't have loyalty programs. The OTAs arrived, the brands brought out these loyalty programs to try to bring back the guests. So basically today we're giving the operators a tip for having lost the customer in the first place. And a pretty hefty tip, 4.5%, 5% of revenues. That's pretty close to what their fees are. And those unredeemed points and things go to the operator's bottom line. They will argue that that's part of the whole pricing strategy, the inclusion of the OTAs, and just the other day we were talking that actually some of the OTA rates are better than what gets through travel agents, bulk sales and the like, that they're actually more profitable despite the relatively high cost of third-party bookings, anywhere from 25 down to what I think the Marriott Accor get it down to about 12%. I mean, that's, to me, with the bigger operators, that's probably their biggest proposition, is to the extent they can deliver direct and that they can negotiate down those OTA rates. And that might be the biggest offering they have, offset by perhaps less attentive management of your property than you might get with a smaller operator or with an independent operator under franchise. Let's see. This is, I'll end with this. It's a termination for the brand going into disrepute. And I came up with this was in 2003, and I was negotiating, this was in Batumi in Georgia. And my developer, he'd fallen in love with the Trump brand. And I said, look, this guy is not respected in New York. He's from the boroughs. He's a Brooklyn, Queens guy. He's volatile. He could blow up his brand. Do you really want to do this? And so we put in there that in the event that the brand, through maybe terrorist incidents somewhere, where they became a high-risk hotel to stay, or it's almost like a morals clause in a celebrity endorsement contract. Tiger Woods had his scandals some years, and Nike terminated his things. That we had this termination right for should the brand somehow go into disrepute, or a country boycotts a certain brand from a certain country. Other termination rights, you have your performance tests, very difficult to achieve. Maybe termination at will after 7 years with some sort of payout. Um, um, Termination for loss of the brand. Sounds unlikely, but it does happen. I've had it 3 or 4 times in my career. In fact, one we negotiated, we were about to sign, and then we found out that the brand didn't have the rights to use the brand in that country. And the cost of acquiring that brand from these Chechnyan owners, they wanted $50 million to allow the use, so we had to terminate. Finally, I think I'll end with choice of law. Most of the big brands will their contracts have been drafted by English or American common law lawyers, and their contracts are common law drafted. If you opt for local law here, UAE law or any GCC law, that's civil law, and it may feel like it's home. It does have some requirements to amend the contracts. There will be no automatic termination rights. The termination will have to be subject to a court order unless you can waive that. Frequently in civil law things, expert determinations can't be binding unless you separately negotiate that. Public policy exceptions can come in some cases that interest can't be charged because it's against Sharia, whereas on an English law contract you might be able to get that. As I said, most of these are, and especially here with the DIFC courts, the Abu Dhabi ADGM courts, which are they're common law, somewhat quasi-English law, especially ADGM. There is a great deal of bulk of precedent, and it is a quite reliable system, albeit and court system or the arbitration system. So I'm frequently happy to go with English law on these contracts just because I think there's a lot of precedent, there's a lot of experience. The courts are experienced in handling them, and the contracts that you're negotiating, they were drafted as common law contracts and don't need revision. So I think that's it. If we have any other questions, or that's it. Yes, one more. Yes.
Thank you, Scott. I'm with the Public Investment Fund in Saudi Arabia. I want to maybe take us back a second to a point you mentioned earlier on branded residences being very new, especially to the region, and I'd probably say even newer to the kingdom itself. So what are some performance tests that we can sort of examine or ask to include in these contracts from this very early stage?
Well, with a branded residence, you won't have a performance test because you're not operating it. You're selling it with the name of the brand for a marketing license fee of 3, 4, 5% to a residential buyer, and then they live in it. You don't have to sell, so you don't have a performance test based on an annual budget or RevPAR against comparable hotels or branded residents. You've sold it. You don't. Performance tests are for you're not consistently selling our property equivalent to comparable hotels. You've sold. If there was a rental pool and those residences were effectively part of the hotel, then they might become part of a performance test, but that would be a performance test linked with the hotel. All right, well, thank you. Thank you for your questions, and happy to discuss any others personal. Thanks very much.